Report will be on Wi-Fi use in the Elk Grove Unified School District. Mr. Graham. I understand that you have 15 minutes for your presentation tonight?
Right.
Okay.
Where do I point? Just hold and click. Is it the bottom one? The one that looks like a stop? The right one. Got it. All right. Good morning, trustees and staff. My name is Mark Graham. I live in Elk Grove. Hope you can hear me well. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about...
You can't.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah.
This morning I'm going to talk to you about a health hazard that's happening not only here in the school district, but across California and across the nation and in many countries, and why it really is a health hazard, and I'll have some recommendations for what you can do about it. I refer you to, I gave you two packets. The first one is it's the slides that I'm doing today, and I want to point out two things. You read them down, all the way down the first column, and then down the second column on each page. Not how I initially expected it, but that's the way it came out of the printer. I also want to mention I have about 10 extra copies for folks in the audience who might want to pick it up. All right. I'm not going to read these slides to you. I was told that's not a good idea, but here's my intention and here's my wish for the district. The one thing I want to emphasize is that it does not require an advanced degree in engineering or medicine or biological sciences or any of that to get a grasp on what I'm talking about today. It's plain English, it's common sense, and this is really what I'm asking the Board of Trustees to do. I think this is the approach that you take in general when it comes to proposals for the school district, and so it shouldn't be really too much out of your comfort zone, if at all. These are the basic facts that I believe can help guide your decision. The basis for this, and I presented it in the information I gave you earlier, is the LCAP. The LCAP, I think it's goal 3.4, says something to the effect that students will have appropriate technology and be able to connect to the internet. Appropriate technology could mean a hardwired internet connection, and it is not necessarily Wi-Fi. These are some of the health impacts that people experience from wireless radiation. Not every person will experience wireless radiation exactly the same. I would venture to guess that every one of you has a cell phone. You probably hold it right up next to your head when you're talking on the phone. And my recommendation is, based on the scientific research, that is not healthy for you. It's more healthy to put it on speakerphone and hold it at arm's length or speak on a landline or a Bluetooth even. But these are some of the things. If you ask your teachers, if you showed your teachers this list and said, are your students experiencing any of these things? I would be very surprised if your teachers did not say, well, yes. As a matter of fact, I've had most of these symptoms in my classroom in at least one student. It happens, and these are the symptoms. The proposed benefits, what's in it for you? These are what you could get from getting rid of this toxin. I would think that every one of these things would be worth working towards. And I'll tell you one thing, in 2007, 8, and 9, I was in the teacher preparation program at Sac State. I was trying to earn a physics teaching credential. I ultimately did not earn it, and the main reason that took me out was classroom management. So I know from a teacher's perspective how valuable it is when you have students that are focused, concentrating, and paying attention. And that's one of the benefits you can get by getting rid of Wi-Fi in the classroom. This may seem like an irony, it is kind of ironic that a type of product that's licensed for use by the federal government is actually hazardous. It creates hazardous situations in the schools. You might not expect that, but really is what's going on. Fortunately, you do not have to follow, you do not have to go like to the bottom of the barrel and do what's permitted just because it's permitted. I think that you can do, you're not constrained at all by Washington. We'll get into that a little bit later. You can do what is, in your opinion, the right thing in the interests of the students and the teachers in your classroom. And the parents would be grateful for that as well. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but I mentioned this earlier with regard to the Federal Communications Commission. Far too often, the industries that are supposed to be regulated end up owning the regulators, and that's what's going on with Federal Communications Commission in this case. One would hope that the agency setting exposure limits for radio frequency radiation would be an agency with expertise in health and safety, such as, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency. And we were heading that way in 1995, as this slide explains, but the authority to do that and to complete their regulations was taken away from Environmental Protection Agency. Their work was defunded, and that authority was given over to Federal Communications Commission. And I'm not saying that's where the problems began, but in terms of Wi-Fi and in terms of the standards that we have on the books today, that is where the problems began. All right. I began asking questions in March, early March of this year, by email, to try and find out, at the time when the district was considering installing Wi-Fi in the classrooms, what kind of investigation did the district do? And I found it very difficult to get straight answers to these questions. I got incomplete answers. I got, in some cases, no answers. And so I've reached the conclusion that's described up on this slide, what I would consider to be due diligence, it simply appears the district did not do. It appears that the salesman from Hewlett-Packard came to the district and said, I have something to sell you, and you were not sufficiently critical and did not think critically, which you teach your students every day, and you basically accepted what he wanted, lock, stock, and barrel. When we talk about long-term exposure, and a lot of the scientific research is about the health impacts of long-term exposure to very low levels of radiation, we have long-term exposure, and that's what the data on this slide are showing. If the students were only getting exposed to a few hours of Wi-Fi per week or something like that, it might not make any difference. But as far as I know, and I'm not a student here, the Wi-Fi is on every day, all day, and it's forced radiation because they don't have a choice. It's important to know what's up here on this slide, because it kind of shows, it gives you a first important fact as to the current state of federal regulation. I should say that the FCC began in March 2013 the process of reassessing the data with the possibly rulemaking to change the maximum permissible exposure guidelines. That was more than 3 years ago. They have not completed that process. It appears to me they've put it on the shelf. But as the status quo goes, two things continue to happen. The industry continues to make profits, and adults and students and children continue to suffer the effects of wireless radiation. And it's been more and more studied by scientists from all around the world. Where are we going here? Right. Now, one of the answers that I got from district staff when I asked the questions, tell me about the investigation that the district did when you were trying to make this decision. The staff told me, well, you see, all the federal agencies agree. Wireless radiation is harmless. That is not the case. I'm not going to go through every one of these things, but right now we are on the page of the handout. Which page is it? It is the bottom, the first column on page 3. And for the next 2 pages, we've got statements from different federal agencies, some of them made back in the 1990s when Federal Communications had proposed this rule and they had not made it official yet, and some of them, one from EPA 2002, one from the U.S. Department of the Interior 2014. But what they are expressing is the problems with the proposed, now 20 years old, emission guidelines that FCC has put out. I've highlighted the key statements. You can read it on your handout. There's certainly not enough time to go through all these. But the key point to note is, even at the time, it was obvious to other federal agencies, Occupational Health and OSHA, Safety and Health Administration, and National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, that FCC was making a mistake. They were making multiple mistakes, and one of them was that they were going on the assumption that if wireless radiation did not cause the body tissue to heat, it would not cause any problem. That was known to be false at the time. It's even more thoroughly known to be false now, because there have been literally hundreds of studies done since then that have shown, yes, there can be biological effects from wireless radiation even if it's not enough to heat the tissue. So, we are living with a mistake, and your students and teachers are suffering from it every day. All right. I am not going to read these to you. Here, this slide is important because what it shows is several examples of products, widely used products, that used to be approved and considered safe by the federal government. Well, we should all be familiar with these. I think Vioxx killed it was 50,000 and 500,000 people before it was finally pulled off the market. The federal government has made mistakes before, and this is another one. It takes a long time for these mistakes to get unraveled. Now, when we talk about regulations, you would like the regulation, the maximum permitted level of some toxin to be set at a level that actually protects your health, right? Protects your health and safety. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And this is an example of a hypothetical speed limit, like a maximum, that everybody could comply with. It would save some lives, and yet it's way too high. And that's just what we have going on with Federal Communications Commission. Here's another hypothetical example. I am sure the school district is never going to set a policy like this. However, the same things apply. It would save some lives. You would have nearly 100% compliance, and it would be the wrong way to do it. Now, these are statements from different scientists that have done the original laboratory research and published it in peer-reviewed scientific journals, and this is their conclusions on the next several slides, that essentially the maximum permissible exposure guideline that the FCC set in 1996 and has not updated since then are way too high. District staff is going to present a report to you later today that's going to say, well, we took some measurements at 3 different schools, Franklin High School and a middle school and an elementary school, and these prove that there's no problem. Well, there are multiple problems with the report, and besides that, even if you can prove compliance with the guideline that FCC set in 1996, because of the flaws in the guideline, because the guideline is way too high, that does not prove safety. And that's a key point. California Medical Association has also been calling for stricter standards, more protective standards, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics. All right, I want to get to my recommendations. Oh, I also want to point out, the other flyer the other packet that I gave you, the first page of it, it's front and back, and it's called Reasons to Reject the Hammett and Edison Report. It's quite detailed. They made major technical mistakes, and I think the school district should demand a refund and reject the report. And if you want to hire an honest man to do this kind of electromagnetic survey, hire Eric Windheim. But at the very least, you should reject this report and demand a refund. What are my recommendations? The right way to do this, make an investment in the schools, make an investment in the students and the teachers, and that is get rid of the Wi-Fi wireless internet connections. The last page of this packet, with the little tiny writing it looks like this, is a spreadsheet, and it provides a cost estimate. The overall cost, and I know we've got a large school district here and a lot of students, but the overall cost is just a hair over $2 million. It may sound like a lot of money. I want to point out that it does not mean that the money that you have invested already in the Wi-Fi system and the internet system would be wasted. You would still be using most of the, let's say, the technology infrastructure that you've already put in place, and what you would be changing is that last step where it's actually delivered to the student. In essence, the Chromebooks, you've got 20,000 Chromebooks or so, and they could be equipped to be hardwire connected to the internet, and that's what I recommend. This slide here, I'm going to leave it up. It was also the last page of one of the attachments that I gave you, And the key thing here about this slide is the top line up there where it says 10,000, that's the level of the permissible radiation exposure currently set by the Federal Communications Commission, which, by the way, does not even apply to wireless access points. But that's how it's been played. Beneath that, and this is a logarithmic scale, you see those red dots. Each one of those represents a different peer-reviewed scientific study that found significant biological effects, and it shows you how much lower the radiation levels were in each of those studies. So you go down to 1/10th, 1,000th, 1/10,000th of where the limit is, and there's still biological effects. This is something you should not be subjecting your students to. All right, the last point I want to make is about averaging. This is a close-up of the federal part 1.1310 of Title 47, and this is the actual emission guidelines set by the FCC. And what I've circled here is that the units are minutes, 6 minutes on top for occupational and 30 minutes below for non-occupational. There is a problem with using an average to set.
20 seconds.
Thank you. How about this? Based on his average temperature, this man feels comfortable. The average is not the important statistic. What's the important statistic is what the body is actually experiencing. It's comparable to in a boxing fight, you could get hit once in a 3-minute round and knocked on your butt, and the average punch through the 3-minute round would be like a tap on the arm because you only got hit with one punch.
Time's completed, sir.
I ask you to take the recommendations into consideration and reject the Hammond and Edison report and demand a refund. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
What was that?
Bob? You coming up? Yeah, he's supposed to come up.
Thank you, Mr. Forcina, members of the board, members of the public, Superintendent Hoffman, and Ms. Avalos. So we actually were not in a position, nor were we planning on presenting the Hammond Edison report. We'd be happy to discuss that with you. I want to be very clear about the nature of the report and why it was commissioned. Superintendent Hoffman, myself, Mr. Mate, and a number of other staff members behind the scenes have been working with Mr. Graham and his counterparts since January of 2016. We have spent literally countless hours on the requests, on communicating back and forth with them. The board will recall in some correspondence between the superintendent and yourselves that of the requests made by Mr. Graham and his counterparts, we did agree to look into and do some of the things, one of which was the report that was shared with you, provided by Hammond and Edison. Unfortunately, it appears Mr. Graham and his counterparts don't agree with the conclusions of the report, but I want to be clear with the board that based on some assertions and some accusations, we have no former relationship with Hammond Edison. They came recommended to us. We didn't feel it appropriate to use one of the counterparts or colleagues to conduct the report because it was clear that there was some opinions that not all agree with. So we felt it necessary to find a kind of unbiased source, again, that came recommended. I had a simple conversation making a request for the RF power density report. They complied with that and conducted the report. So we weren't necessarily using it as a trigger to continue or to eliminate Wi-Fi in our classrooms. We simply were complying with the request that we thought was reasonable. Although we only did 3 schools as opposed to all schools, we thought it would be a good sampling and an indicator. As it was shared with the board, you'll see that the results of the report were that in all cases at all 3 schools, the levels were far below federal communication standard levels. In some cases, thousands of times below, no less than, I believe it was 320 times below the standard. In our correspondence with Mr. Graham, it's clear that they take a different look at these things than do we. We feel in a position where until the Federal Communications Commission, notwithstanding their opinions about the FCC and the background of the FCC and how these things come about, that they are the regulating agency, and we are simply complying with those regulations and those standards. And so I would be happy to answer any questions that the board might have about our history with these folks for the last 7 months and where this has led. We've felt that some of the requests were reasonable and could be easily accommodated, and we've done so. Clearly, we've stopped short, though, of eliminating Wi-Fi in all of our schools and classrooms. So with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Bob. Are any questions for Mr. Pierce? Okay. Okay, before we entertain general comments from the board, we do have 5 people that have submitted a blue card, and you'll be called up to give your input.
Miss Sheila Rebel?
Hi, I'm just a resident in Acampo.
Please state your name
Oh,
for
sorry.
record. Too.
Sheila Revel. I live in Acampo, California, and I live within a mile of a cell phone tower. And I'm here to tell you some of the effects that that's had on me personally. And I'm also a school teacher in another district. And I'm going to tell you a few concerns I have about the classroom because we're going 1-to-1 next year. And I was on the adoption committee that selected this particular curriculum that is a hybrid. And we're all excited about it because, you know, it's internet, the kids get to go online, we can grade online, they can do all kinds of communicating and stuff. We voted unanimously to accept it. Over the summer, I read about 4 books by PhDs, medical doctors, and educated myself about electromagnetic pollution. And I became concerned and about the health effects. And I don't believe our district has actually looked into the health effects. And because, you know, we're all excited, we want it, it's technical, it's digital, and, you know. Personally, I live within a mile of a Wi-Fi tower, and since moving 4 years ago there, I've experienced ringing in my ears at night when I try to go to sleep. My sleep is disrupted. I toss and turn. I can't sleep restfully. When I wake up in the morning, I'm tired and I feel beaten. I don't feel rested. When I go outside, I'm an avid outdoors person. I like to be out in my yard. I can only stay out in my yard for about 15 minutes before I want to go back in. And I never knew why I wanted to go back in because I love the outdoors. And after about a half an hour of work in the yard, I'm wiped out for the day. And I'm a pretty healthy person. I eat well. And so Eric came to my house and he did some measurement readings of the RF radiation. And they were rather high. And they were especially high in the rooms that I was trying to sleep in. So since then I've moved to a different room that has lower readings, and I've done some shielding, and I've experienced some changes. I can when I lay down, I'm still. I don't toss and turn. I get more rest. I feel more rested in the morning. When he put that thing up there of symptoms, I was really shocked because I've been in teaching for 17 years, and my first 5-7 years never had a student say, "Oh, I have a nosebleed. I need to go. I need to go now. My nose is bleeding." Never happened. This happens about once a month, every other month. In fact, I have a standard protocol. The students do this, and I know they're having a nosebleed, and I do this. Go now. Go. Just go to the bathroom and take care of it. And I never knew, you know, why does that happen?
Got 20 seconds left.
Okay. So anyway, in a nutshell, I'm really glad I came here out of curiosity. I wanted to see how Elk Grove is dealing with this, because I can see it as potentially becoming a health problem in other districts as well. And if you guys are proactive on this and a leader
Your
in...
time's up. Expired.
you.
Thank you. Okay, Paul McGavin. Yeah. Eric Winheim.
Good evening, Board. My name is Eric Windheim. I'm a building biologist and an electromagnetic radiation specialist, and I want to talk to you briefly about some happy Wi-Fi stories. I'm going to have a happy ending to this. These are success stories I've had with clients, and I want to talk to you about Dr. Kelly Sutton, who's a holistic MD in Fair Oaks. She saw one of my EMF awareness seminars. She had me do one for her office staff. A few months later, she thought it might be good for me to check out her office, but she didn't think that anything possibly could be wrong. The first thing we found out that she had a very powerful Wi-Fi 2 feet from the receptionist. And so we shielded that. We just put it in an enclosure and aimed it out the wall. And the receptionist says, oh my gosh, I'm starting to feel better, but we tested it. There's still Wi-Fi coming through the wall from the secretary in the other office. So we put up inexpensive but highly effective reflective foil. And 3 times before I could pack up my instruments and leave, the receptionist said, I'm feeling better already. I don't have pain and cramps in my neck. A week later, I get a call from the doctor. She's feeling better, and the other doctor, Dr. Bear in the office, are feeling better. Now, this is the opinion of a medical doctor. So Dr. Kelly Sutton said, come to my house. And we identified the Wi-Fi and we turned it off at night. She's got a roommate, so it has to be on during the daytime. She's sleeping better at home. So now I've helped a medical doctor at home and in her office. The same thing goes for Dr. Julie Y. Schatzel, whose husband is a neurologist. They live in Gold River. She called me out to her house. She had breathing problems and sleeping problems and thought it was just old age. And I said, Julie, you're 20 years younger than me. We turned off the Wi-Fi. We gave one of the children had a RF shielding canopy over the bed. She's sleeping better. She's feeling better. Now, I want to talk to you about a really sad case. That's Brian and his son. They live down in Vallejo. I did an EMF awareness seminar for the Weston A. Price Foundation down in Vacaville, and Brian was there. A month later, he calls up and said, Eric, my son has been pulled out of high school, and he's been required to see a behavioral psychologist. Please come and see if you can find out what's going on. And the first thing I found when I went into the house was one of these 3 antenna Wi-Fi directly underneath his son's bed. And I said, that has got to go. Completely out of the house or to the other end of the house.
20 seconds, sir.
And Brian wrote me back a couple weeks ago. It's on my website, and he says, thank you, Eric. Since we followed most of your suggestions, all of my son's problems have gone away. Now, it's just too bad that people have to hit themselves in the head with a hammer to find out how good it feels when they stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm Paul McGavin. I am an expert in measuring and mitigating radio frequency radiation. We have had 3 experts review the Hammett and Edison report that cost you, I believe, $6,000, and of course it was $1,800 for Mr. Oli, sitting in the back, to show up today. And so we really should hear from Mr. Oli because you spend $1,800 to get him here. So what we're trying to say is that we have had this report reviewed by a PhD on the East Coast, and 2 other people who've been trained to measure and mitigate radio frequency radiation. And we can tell you for sure this report is substandard and makes false conclusions and completely misses a methodology section. We had very simple questions about this report that we tried to get answered through public records requests from Thursday of last week through yesterday. We were absolutely denied by everyone in the process. No one returned a single call, even though calls were promised returned. Nobody in the district decided to try to get this kind of information. You need accurate information in order to make your best decisions. You can't just stonewall your way to a bad decision. I'm telling you flat out, this report is not worth the money you spent. You actually need clarification of what's going on, and I'm going to point out what's wrong with this report right now. Okay? This is called an executive summary. There is got to be a methodology section. I have reviewed 30 of these reports. Every single one has a methodology section. It's very important to know what meter was used, what settings were on the meter, What were the conditions upon which you made your measurements? What was happening in the classroom at the time? What time of day did you make the measurements, and were students present or not, or were things actually downloading or not? None of this is in this report. This report is nonsensical. And the most important thing to look at is you sit there and go, well, we've got some numbers, okay? And these are some numbers. And you look at these things called microwatts per centimeter squared, and boy, those numbers look like there are lots of zeros on there. What did you measure? Did you measure average? Or did you measure maximum instantaneous? Those are two very different things. Your body doesn't react to average. It doesn't react to the single punch over a round. It doesn't react to the 1 watt of a strobe light. It reacts to every single pulse that's coming at them. How many pulses are you getting? Between 10 and 600 times a second. That's what you're actually getting. And that is why you need to measure the maximum instantaneous, which was available to Mr. Olai when he did this study. I believe, we have to assume, he did not use that. Now, the meter that he used has been discontinued for over 10 years. I spoke directly to the manufacturer, Narda, and I talked to Jerry Spinelli, the vice president of sales and marketing. He explained to me fully what was going on with the selection of both the meter and the probe. Both were wrong. The meter is over 10 years old. It was discontinued 10 years ago. They do no longer calibrate these meters, Narda, because they have replacement meters. 520 and 550, which are much better, and they log more data. This meter, however, would log 1,500 data points. 1,500 data points are sufficient for you to get a log similar to Eric Wendheim's log. That's what you need to understand what you're doing. You don't want the summary of the average at the end. You want the raw data to see what is really happening in these classrooms. The key point is there's a bunch of traffic. It is very difficult to be 100% of the place all the time and be able to measure in every single place. So you have to have some good methodology in place to say, am I a reasonable distance from my Chromebook? Does this emulate where a student would actually sit when the activity was going on? All of that missing from this report. We have no idea. So in my attempt to try to get clarification from anyone, the school district, or directly from the engineering firm, I drove over there yesterday, I had a conversation in their lobby, they refused to talk to me. I had a letter with them showing the California Public Records request. I had a letter with me showing I'm an agent of Mr. Graham's. Stonewall, stonewall, stonewall. So at the end of the day, the pattern of hiding information from the public is against the law. It's against California Public Records request. You can't do that anymore. What you really need is you need to bring Mr. Olai up here and ask him some questions. Allow the public to ask him some questions. You should actually want to know what's behind this report. All right? So the important thing to know is you take a look at Eric Windheim's report. He showed you this earlier, okay? That's a very simple thing to do. That's called, how did I set up my test? Where were the meters? How far were they from the sources? That's important information because the power density drops based on the square of the distance. This is important to know, all right? The other important thing to know is what's the data stream? What does it actually look like? What kinds of peaks am I experiencing over here when Wi-Fi is engaged? And what kind of experience do I have over here when Wi-Fi is not engaged? Was there anything done to make sure that the antennas were operating when he made his measurements? We don't know. It wasn't said in the report. So the issue is, you paid $6,000 for nothing. Now here's the biggest problem. The probe that they used. The probe that they used only measures from 100 kilohertz to 3 gigahertz. You should know that we know the specs of your wireless access points from HP. They have 6 antennas. 3 at 2.4 gigahertz and 3 at 5 gigahertz. And in fact, the 5 gigahertz antennas are more powerful. Those are 7 dBi antennas. These are only 5 dBi antennas. It is absolutely accurate to conclude that because the Hammett Edison, charging you $6,000, chose the wrong probe, they missed at least half of the radiation they could possibly measure because the probe itself doesn't measure it. Unbelievable. This is called RF 101. They failed, okay? If they didn't actually have it handy, they should have rented it. There are over 10 firms in California that rent these things on a weekly basis. You need to have the information of the frequencies that you're actually putting in your rooms. And your rooms are put in by these HP wireless access points are both 2.4 and 5. And the devices that they use are both 2.4 and 5. And you need to know how it measures when your devices are on and when they're downloading data, because that's what matters. Eric did it. He showed you right here. What a peak. 167,000 microwatts per meter squared. Think about that for a second. That's the biggest knockout punch you can get. And this is just an instant of time. This happens to these kids all day long. All day long. Why? Because you don't understand the nature of radio frequency radiation. But I explained it to you very clearly. It's a strobe light. And this is an inappropriate thing to put on the youngest of children who are more prone to this radiation risk than our adults. Why? They are smaller. They have higher water content. They actually are better antennas. The frequency, the guideline, the spec for 802.11n, which is what your wireless access points put out, by spec have to reach 800 feet. 800, outside. But inside, it only goes maybe 250 feet. Well, what happens in those two environments? Well, inside, you have things called absorbers. And those absorbers are walls, concrete, maybe whiteboards, but the best absorber of all, children. The children are absorbing more of this radiation than anything else. And so the difference between 800 feet and 250 feet is the fact that you're pumping this into children all day long, completely unnecessarily, because you have a low-cost alternative. Something people don't talk about much, but I'm going to tell you right now. Any wireless network, the traffic from that wireless network can be captured by any pedophile that wants to drive their car to the curb, stick in a $100 device into their laptop, open it up. They enable what's called promiscuous mode. What does that do? That can capture 100% of the traffic on any school's Wi-Fi network. What are they looking for? They're looking for mistakes. Because who are the weakest users in a system? Children. What are they sending back and forth to each other? Getting around filters and trying to figure out ways to use this cool technology. They're sending messages to their friends, pictures of themselves and their friends, and they're making times to meet. My goodness, what wonderful information for a pedophile to have. If you had a wired network, you would not be risking that at all, because that person would then have to gain access to the campus and actually put a physical device on the wire. For basic safety of children, a wired network is what you want. And the good news, you already have big fat pipes in order to make your wireless network work. The big fat pipes come from the district to the curb, they go to the routers first, and then to switches, and eventually to the endpoints. Well, the endpoints, let me show you what they look like. Let's switch over, do the refresh. Can we switch to the slides, please? While we're waiting to switch to slides, I want to show you a petition signed by parents. And this is a petition that says, please turn off the wireless access points and please do wired internet. This is one weekend in Petaluma, California. Page 1. Are you over already? All right. 5 pages of signatures. Parents who realize that the National Toxicology Program study is for real, folks. You do not want to damage your children in your schools unnecessarily. All right, go back to the, please. What this is a animation of a classroom. The yellow is the wireless access point. To the right, each square represents the federal maximum public exposure guideline. This shows an analysis that in a single classroom measured in 2013 with my meter, court admissible, with the permission of the school district, and agreement by both the FCC and federal OSHA on how to calculate total exposure over time. This is the answer. You get 40 times the maximum public exposure guideline
About 20 seconds.
in 1 week. Let that sink in. You exceed the federal maximum public exposure guideline 8 times in a day, just from one wireless access point. Add 30 Chromebooks in there, and you're exceeding it by 50, 100, 150 times. Why? Because you're adding it up over time. Exposure over time is what really matters. Thank
Or
you.
your time's up. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Graham, thank you for your report this morning. Based on the report given by Mr. Graham, do any of the board members have questions that they need to ask? Okay. Any desires to provide further direction to staff? All right, thank you. All right, next item is public hearing, and we have none. We'll move on to discussion items. Resolution to support placing a local school bond on the November 2016 ballot. Mr. Pierce. I don't know. Yeah, I know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forcina, members of the board, Superintendent Hoffman, and Ms. Avalos. I stand before you today with great excitement in what is to be a hopefully monumental time for the Elk Grove Unified School District. As the board well knows, and members of the public, beginning in 2014, the district began a major project and a commitment to our community, and that's to define the facility needs of our district over the next decade and to come up with a solution to address those needs over the next decade. We've worked very, very hard over this 2-year period, both you, the board, the superintendent, cabinet, all of our administration, and in particular our facilities department. So it's the culmination of a lot of work and effort by some folks. So I do want to thank Mr. Bill Heineke. He's our Director of Planning, as you well know, Kim Williams, who's our planning manager, and both Eileen Cruz and the rest of my department for their efforts in this regard. But I also want to thank the board and Superintendent Hoffman for their direction and their vision. This has been a journey, and it's nice to be at the conclusion of this. We also have a team assembled, which I've jokingly referred to as the A-team. They're here tonight and answer any questions that you might have, whether it be along bond council lines, strategy discussions, or also financial discussions. That's Dan Maruccia, who's here today with Lozano Smith, Tom Clifford, who's with Clifford Moss, and then we also have Rich Malone and Matt Kolker that are with Government Financial Strategies. You'll remember our conversations previously with Ms. Ranieri, who couldn't be here today. She's being honored in Washington, D.C. So I wanted to, before we take up the resolution, just remind the board and the community, I think it's important to talk about the steps that have been taken and the amount of effort that has gone into this decision. So to talk about the exhaustive process that we've gone through to date. So these are just some examples of the considerations that have come up throughout the process. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's just to give you an idea that both the board and the district administration have conducted due diligence as we've determined this is a solution. So this began 2 years ago with the Learning Environment Workshop, where we've asked people to kind of think outside the box and what does the classroom and the learning environment for the 21st century look. The board will recall multiple discussions and specialty workshops around both need and potential for a bond. We have conducted community surveys that have both been online and written. We have site surveys where every administrative team and their team have conducted surveys about the need of their sites. And then the board will recall that we had special board community meetings in all 7 of your regions about the facility master plan. Superintendent Hoffman and I have been working very closely as well with the certificated and parent advisory committees throughout the process, and their input has also been valuable. moving on, we've had a number of site-based groups and organizations that we've discussed the process with. We held 4 community forums specifically on the development of the facility master plan and soliciting input on need. We've had a lot of online posting of the master plan, and we've always had continuous input opportunities, which continue today. The board will recall that the master plan is a fluid document, and we solicit input at any time with regard to it. We conducted a district-wide facility condition assessment. It's a process that this district has never conducted. It was very in-depth and came to a need of all of our facilities over the next 10 years. And then aside from that, we completed what is the most comprehensive facility master plan in the district. And then again, continuing with today, multiple board reports and discussions specific to bond consideration and sizing of the bond, not necessarily with regard to the facility master plan and the needs in the master plan. But long story short, we feel that we've been very open and that we've been very transparent with the public, as well as our site administrators and all of our stakeholders in the district in soliciting their input. So it's been a very strategic and deliberate process that we've gone through over the last 2 years. So aside from the process, I think we all perfectly understand that we are a very large district. We're the 5th largest in the state of California, and that's only going to continue to grow over time. Certainly with that size, therefore we have an extensive amount of need moving forward just because of the sheer size of our district, the number of schools we have, the number of acres of landscape that we have, the number of classrooms and buildings we have. But one component that I think a lot of people don't recognize, for a long time Elk Grove Unified has been thought of only as a growth district. People think all of our schools are new. I still kind of hear that when I'm downtown and working with state agencies, and it's a misnomer. Our schools date back to 1935. In fact, when you look at the age of our schools, more than half of our schools are over 20 years old. In fact, a 5th of them, whether or not people realize it, but a 5th of our 65 schools are over 50 years old. So just aside from our need and the ongoing costs to keep our buildings in reasonable shape, we have some schools that are aging, and that continues to be the case. And so a lot of this is defined in the facility master plan and the needs that go along with the sheer age, but that alone equates to about $1 billion of need just because of the age of our facilities and the need to bring them up to 21st century learning standards. It's not a highlight of the bond, but we'd be remiss to not talk a little bit just about our growth. I think aside from the age of our schools and the need to bring them up to 21st century standards, we know that our communities are continuing to grow, and growth is going to be a component. The growth component of our bond, and I want to make this very clear for the board and the community, but it's a supplemental portion of the bond. The vast majority of this bond is to go to our existing school sites. But nonetheless, we do need to supplement the growth. Now, if the statewide bond in November doesn't pass, then the board will have to make some very difficult decisions should our bond pass, because in that case, we would only have developer fees and not state funding. But in a perfect scenario, our local bond passes, state bond passes, and our bond will simply be supplemental in terms of growth. But with the number of new homes, the board knows through the facility master plan, total of 90,000 new homes projected in our district, but we're only projecting just south of 20,000 new homes over the next decade, which equates to just south of 14,000 new students over the next decade, and that's referenced here in our projected enrollment. So that's a really quick summary to a nearly 500-page document in our facility master plan. But because of the age of our facilities and our growth needs, our dollar need over the next decade is estimated to roughly $1.7 billion. The only way we're going to meet that need is through a significant community commitment, and we need to make an agreement with our community and move forward in a fashion that they will support us. And that's where we have begun to engage our community and the public and build a funding plan to meet this need. So with those needs identified through the facility master plan, the next step we took, and this is a responsibility that we owe to ourselves and that I owe to the district and to the board in my due diligence and my duties, and that's to gauge the public's opinion and the public's knowledge and support around our needs and the need for a bond in our district. So As you know, we did conduct a public opinion survey in January. We wanted to determine how familiar the community was, not only with the district, but the district's facility needs. We wanted to gauge the community's general support for a bond measure to identify its feasibility. And then we wanted to see how to go best about aligning what the community saw as their need with the projects and the funding that we were proposing. And then naturally just to continue to gather information that's necessary for communications and outreach to find out where the holes were in people's understanding of what we are as a district and what we're moving forward with. So the great news in that survey, and this slide is a slide that the board has seen before. We're looking clearly at a November election now, not a June, but we did gauge support for both. The great news right out of the gates, the initial support of the district in a bond measure was at the 68% level, which is a really favorable place to be, obviously. And with that, it was clear the community valued public education. They knew it was important. In fact, of the poll questions, the value of public education came first of all other needs to our potential voters in our district. But through the polling and the survey, you present different ideas, you present arguments against, you submit, in fact, arguments they might hear opposing the measure and other things they might hear. And at the end of the survey, we were still at a 62% threshold. That gave us the confidence to move forward to get to this point today, which we're happy to be at. So again, the good news is when we looked at our needs in the facility master plan and we combined that with the voters' priorities, everything was already aligned, right? So our identified need aligned beautifully with what the voters saw as important and needed. That's a very fortuitous position to be in as a district, so we didn't have to go and adjust our needs and what we considered moving forward. So literally all the highlights there aligned with the voter priorities. So the next step in this process has been to analyze potential bond size and potential bond structuring. This began in November of 2015. You can recall a number of presentations by myself, Ms. Ranieri, and also Mr. Rich Malone, who's here tonight. The basic premise of a bond size and a tax rate is your assessed valuation in your district. And I can assure you that Government Financial Strategies takes a very appropriate and yet conservative look at things. And so when you look at our historical AV back to 1997, in the rate of growth that we experienced, it all looks well. In fact, before the recession, it was increasing at over 14% a year. That would be a little too ambitious of an AV assumption to make moving forward with regard to our bond size. So we took into account the recession, and you can see that there was nearly a 5% decline in our assessed valuation during the recession, but that's picked up, and since that point in time, it's increased about 7.5% back to where it was pre-recession days. So I've left a lot of slides out. Any detail that the board or community might have in regard to our assessed value assumptions, we'd be happy to get into more detail, but I can assure you after about a 50-page report and a number of assumptions being built into that and checks and balances, we ultimately arrived at a 4.25% AV increase assumption over the course of the bonds. It's a conservative assumption. We've also overlaid into that assumption the number of new homes, not just growth to say our existing homes, but all of the new growth that the district's going to experience over that same time period. So we feel that the assumptions built in are very appropriate, and as I mentioned, those assumptions start dictating both the size of the bond and the structuring of the bond. Pardon me. So this is just a proposed scenario. Ms. Ranieri and company are still working on the ultimate size of our bond. Right now, the number is about $476 million based on our AV assumptions, and most importantly, based on a $38 per 100,000 of assessed value tax rate. One thing that we found in our poll, which was very interesting with me, I ignorantly went into it thinking the voter would be most concerned about the overall size of the bond. Is it 400 million? Is it 600 million? And it was clear that the voter was most concerned about the tax rate. And so you'll recall from our conversations, based on voter acceptance of the tax rate, we were going to stick at $38 per 100,000 of assessed value. So with that, and the current variables at play, we're looking at about $476 million. There was new assessed value issued by the county last Friday. So Government Financial Strategies is looking at that now. We anticipate the number going slightly higher by the time of the August 1st hopeful action from the board. So just know that number started at 436 million. It slowly increased, and we anticipate a change to that. So the point of this slide within that number is just to show you the structuring. So ultimately, we would come out with something roughly around the $80 million issuance in our first sale, and it would culminate in a final sale of roughly $112 million. Each sale would happen on a 2-year increment in 5 issuances. So over a 10-year period, we would issue the full authorization of the bond. So this slide is just to represent what I was referring to earlier. The top line represents $60 per 100,000. That is the statutory maximum that you can allow as a unified school district for a Prop 39 general obligation bond. In other words, you could go up to $60 legally in your assumptions to tax the voting base. We, because of our considerations and our polling, are planning on limiting that at the $38 level. So you can see the gap there that we just want to be clear with the board that exists between your legally maximum tax and what we're proposing. So we hope that the voter will see that as a positive as well. And to that regard, again, I can't stress the underlying assumptions and their importance. Mr. Hoffman and I both in prior lives understand the critical nature when you make a commitment to your voter what their tax rate is going to be. You do not want to exceed it, because you lose your commitment and you lose that contract, if you will. And this is going to be a multifaceted approach. This won't be this is the first, but it hopefully will not be the last bond. So we want to live up to these promises to the voters with that tax rate. And then this is just a slide to show the board that over the course of the bond in the series, this black line represents the legal bonding capacity of our district at 2.5% of our total assessed value. We have never passed a general obligation bond in our district. So right now we're at 0. So you can see even with the sizable bond, $476 million, we are still well below our maximum bonding capacity. And I hope that that's seen favorable. One challenge is we've never passed a bond. The great news is we've never passed a bond. And by that I mean we have been incredibly efficient and wise with the resources that we've had before us. But now the time has come to modernize and enhance those aging schools, and we can clearly show the voter, whereas many districts are submitting petitions right now to the State Board of Education to exceed that black line because they need to exceed that 2.5% capacity. We are not in that position. In fact, we're far below it. So in this proposal, you would still reserve yourself somewhere to the tune of $850 million of future debt, assuming AV doesn't increase. So I think that I see that as a positive as well. So through this process, just in summary, is the need present? I think clearly we can all say yes, we know that to be the case through our work in the facility master plan. We've identified nearly $1.7 billion in needs. Is it feasible? Through our survey, I think it's very clear that we have a substantial amount of support. We know that our voters value public education and what it brings to them, both from a community service perspective, but also from a property value perspective. A lot of homes have been sold in the Elk Grove Unified School District for that very reason. You're in Elk Grove Unified. And then is there bonding capacity? Clearly we've been able to show that, and we have the bonding capacity to proceed. So the considerations before the board. Again, we're not asking for action today. We're just here to present the proposal and ask for your action on August 1st. The tax rate is established at $38 per 100,000 of assessed value. That's clearly within the voter's comfort zone. The bond authorization is going to be somewhere between $475 to $500 million, still within that tax rate that we agreed to with the voter, if you will. The project list that we've established in the resolution before you today is very consistent and tied to the facility master plan. So there's nothing that's outside of our already identified and vetted need with our public. The board will have to appoint a citizens oversight committee. It's one of the accountability measures of Prop 39. You can do that after the election or prior to. And should the board take action on August 1st, the next step will be strategizing with you on the pros and cons of doing that before and or after the election. The board will be establishing the priorities, in other words, which projects we're going to proceed after we determine whether or not the bond's passed or not. Obviously, election date is set for November 8th, 2016. So what we're going to do, again, continuing to move forward, the time for input has not been exhausted. Folks still have until August 1st to give us additional feedback. Myself, Mr. Hoffman, and some board members, if not all board members, are welcome to continue that communication, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later today. But we want, again, voters that we haven't been able to reach, we want to hear from them. We want to share with them our overall plan, let them know there is a plan, share with them the accountabilities and the benefits to their particular community. So there's going to be a mailer, a district-wide mailer that is going to go out before August 1st, explaining the bond and explaining what it means to the individual voter and community member. All of our school sites are about to receive one-page documents that tell every parent or community member what that individual school is going to receive. And then, as I mentioned, there's going to be a significant outreach from district, the administration, and the board between now and August 1st, but even beyond, obviously, through November 8th. So key dates, here we are today, July 12th, sharing with you the ballot measure in the package. August 1st, we're asking the board to take action on the resolution, which the County of Sacramento needs us to do prior to August 12th, and then November 8th is your election day. So I know I threw a lot at you there, but I really feel that we've been very open in this conversation. As you well know, we've exhausted discussions with the board along this matter, and again, I'm tickled to be here today and to be proposing a bond measure here in Elk Grove Unified School District.
Thank you, Rob. Mr. Manderson, questions or comments?
Yeah, I don't really have any questions. I guess, well, one question. On the survey, when was the latest survey on your slide that you showed earlier?
So we've, in terms of the survey to voters, the phone survey, that was only conducted the one time in January.
Okay.
We've had follow-up surveys with anybody who's willing to take the survey. In fact, we're going to have another one as part of the mailer that's going out prior to August 1st. We're inviting people to take the survey via online or call my office and take the survey if they don't have access to the internet.
Okay, that was one concern I had. So there's another one will be going out
Another
as
one
well,
coming,
too. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, it certainly appears that the community recognizes our need, the majority of them, so we can look at our facilities and move forward on it. So I am somewhat pleased with that. But I'm curious on this next one you're mailing out too, because we're getting to obviously to the pinnacle point there of election.
And quite honestly, I think if the initial polling wasn't as high as it was, we probably would be conducting follow-up polling to get a sense of where the community's at. But throughout the process, the support is there. It's a really advantageous position to be in because they're not inexpensive endeavors. But we may, moving forward, consider doing additional polling depending on what we find.
And it's very encouraging too to see that this is our first general application.
Yeah.
And I know I've been around a long time, and yeah, we have done an excellent job in our resources. And what we're not even tapping out at it at all.
Close.
Because I've talked to some of my colleagues around in the area. They're scrambling pretty hard.
Yeah. Yep.
Overall, good report, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perez? Questions?
In regards to modernization, within my district, as you know, there's a lot of old schools, and we're using a lot of what do you call them, relocatable
Portables? Yeah.
portables.
Mhm.
Now, what's the plan on those?
So you're absolutely right, Mr. President. In your trustee region, you have a significant number of the aging schools, and you all do, but you have a number of them. So the details of how the modernization works, so we have a process with the board where once the board prioritizes those projects, we go forward and start analyzing the more specific needs. So the master plan says, Florin High School, for instance, is deemed this dollar amount in terms of modernization. Once the board prioritizes that project, then we go out and we start doing the design work around that, and we will be presenting options to the board. We call that schematic design approval. So you will give us direction ultimately on the breadth of the work. So whether that's spending money on portables, which I probably wouldn't recommend, or demolishing portables and rebuilding with permanent structures, those are options that will be presented to the board.
Well, I know that some of our elementaries right now, there's no room for actual portables.
Right.
So, I mean,
Yep. And in those cases, there's either boundary changes or future schools that are needed because those schools are at capacity.
so what criteria did we use when we did modernization with Dillard Elementary?
Very good question. It's kind of case in point of my example. So,
Okay.
the Dillard master plan, in other words, the process to decide what we were going to do at Dillard had 23 different renditions before the board ultimately pulled the trigger and gave us direction. So that's a process that we would be going through with each of these schools. So should the bond pass, we're about to be very, very busy in terms of our facilities and our planning moving forward. So the board, in Dillard's case, they looked at everything from modernizing those existing buildings to ultimately what you've seen now is demolishing those buildings and rebuilding it, and everything in between. And so those are discussions that we'll be having moving forward should the bond pass for many of these projects.
Yeah, I'm mainly concerned about, I guess, the school that you may have gone to, the
Kennedy?
Kennedy. So on that one, definitely, I think you need to build because just recently I just seen in the county office of, I guess, the building permits that they plan to do more housing, which really surprised me just lately that they're planning to do more housing within that geographical area. So
Yeah, there's a
good.
multifamily development
Right,
that's
uh-huh.
associated. It's part of a redevelopment piece there in the Kennedy area.
So that's definitely going to affect our,
Absolutely.
those two schools, Reese and
Yep,
Florin maybe
absolutely.
too. Right?
Yeah, that entire region, Reese, Florin, Kennedy, certainly needs have been identified, in the master plan, and should the bond pass, we're excited to do those projects.
All right, thank you. Good report.
Thank you.
Dr. Martinez-Leary?
Again, I would just like to say thank you for the report. I guess my main question stems from if we do move forward and the bond is approved, will you be coming to us then at that time as a partnership to kind of let us know the major projects identified,
Yeah.
similar to like the laid out in the master plan?
So should the bond pass, I would say when the bond passes, to be more optimistic, we will definitely be coming forward to the board with recommendations, but ultimately the board taking an action on priorities and timing. And then, I think today's agenda, we didn't have a facilities update. When the bond passes, you're going to have a facilities update every board meeting. I can't imagine not, because for this 10 years, we're going to be very, very busy, and there's going to be a lot of decisions. In fact, I could probably envision a few more board meetings in those years as a result of that work. So absolutely.
Thank you for the report.
Ms. Albiani?
Good.
Okay, I don't have specific questions of you. I just have one, Superintendent, in terms of perhaps a procedural issue, and I'm just not clear on it. This item will be brought back for decision on August 1st,
Correct.
and the recommendation on the agenda references August 16th. So is that a problem for us in terms of communicating that date with people?
I'll have to look at that. It should be August 1st, and it'll be publicly noted to make sure that everyone's
Okay,
aware
yeah, I
of
just
that.
had picked that up, that there was a difference. Yeah, I think at the point in time that the bond passes, we're going to have a lot of interesting board meetings.
Yep.
And not to and my comment is not to lecture, but just to make a statement that as trustees on the Elk Grove Unified School District Board of Education, our responsibility is to all of the schools and all of the children in the entire district, and not just for one specific trustee area that one might be elected from. And that is a responsibility we can't forget.
Good point.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Don't move. Okay. Discussion action items, none. Action items, first one, Elk Grove Unified School District Community Facilities District 2016-2017 Tax Report, and first reading of ordinance number 1, 2016-2017.
So I say this each year, interesting item for the board because it's your only ordinance that you adopt on an annual basis. We bring this item to you each year. In this case, it's to establish the 2016-2017 tax roll for your Mello-Roos. And so you will see in your packet that there have been some changes to it. It's increased overall tax base by 1% for the coming year. That's a good thing in that the last 3 years, this being the fourth in a row, that you have experienced an increase. That's important because through the recession, for the first time in the history of the district, we were actually experiencing declines to our tax base for the Mello-Roos. So that was a trying time for us all, but moving forward, things look very well. Again, this is a somewhat routine item. It'll be back before the board for your adoption at the August 16th board meeting and delivered to the County of Sacramento in time for them to establish their tax rolls. So I would be happy to answer any questions the board might have about this, but I would ask that you open and close the public hearing as well.
Okay, I'd like to open a public hearing on the proposed ordinance. Okay, hearing no comments or questions, it's closed. Ms. Albiani, questions? Okay, Mr. Madison? Mr. Perez?
No question.
Dr. Martinez-Leary? Thank you, see you on the 16th.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Resolution to eliminate and to reduce a CSEA classified position. Mr. Riley?
Good morning, members of the board, Superintendent Hoffman, Ms. Avalos. I'm here before you to ask you to adopt Resolution Number 7, 2016-17, authorizing the governing board to eliminate or reduce a classified position. This position is in the CSEA bargaining unit. In terms of process, CSEA was notified of the district's intent to eliminate this position on June 20th and June 29th. After the pending approval of this resolution, we will certainly meet to negotiate any impacts, if any, and we will, of course, meet with the affected employee to see if we can make up these 2 hours. So this is a bilingual family advocate, reducing from 8 hours to 6 hours effective September 30th, which will give us some time to work with the employee and find some other work for that employee.
Okay, thank you. We have public comment. Ms. Deutsch?
Thank you for hearing CSEA. It's never easy for us to come up here and talk about losing or reducing any position, especially when we're in the anthem of this district of wanting to retain and recruit the best. This particular position, we feel, hasn't gone through the process. I've actually looked at some of the emails. There was a counter email actually on the 21st. There was discussion. There was never a proposal in our eyes that this was going to be moving forward to you today. We hope that we can kind of postpone this and actually have more of a talk. Where we left off was that we were going to be getting all parties involved. That means the department, the program, and the individual. What happened is this particular individual had to readjust her schedule, not necessarily reduce the schedule. Now there's talk that there's going to be a realignment of the schedule. CSEA was the one that actually drew up the proposal and had it put into law for Ed Code years ago to talk about proper notification, and that would be 45 days proper notification. If this audit was truly done, the proper notification should have occurred in the mid-May. Again, our intention is to actually talk to all parties, especially include this person. When you look at it, you see on the surface it's 2 hours. 2 hours doesn't look like much on a piece of paper, that's 1/4 of her salary. That is going to be gone. So we don't want to dispose of this person. We don't just want to dispose of the position. We want to go and attend to all matters and go and make sure our students and the families for this particular position, does include the families, is protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perez, questions?
Where's this position at? What school?
Works in the family advocacy department,
So it's at headquarters here in the district office?
centered in the district office, yeah.
You said a lack of work. What do you mean by lack of work?
So when our new pre-K director came on board, we kept this position, even though it was considered for a reduction last year. We kept this position as is and did a year-long audit on that work. And given the schedule and the needs of that department and that program, they're about 2 hours short of work. So there was a number of times where the person didn't have anything to do because their hours didn't match with the needs of the program.
So how did the audit get initiated?
Just by supervision.
Supervision,
supervision.
internal
Yeah.
district office, and somebody decided just to do an audit
Yeah.
on this particular person?
Right.
How long has this person been working in that position?
I don't know. Evelyn, can you come up? I'm not sure. But in terms of the timeline, the reason why it would be effective September 30th would be for us to meet those timelines of notification.
Yeah, it's a 60-day notice, not a 45-day notice that we would provide to the employee.
Excuse me, would you say that again, please, Evelyn? Say that again.
It's a 60-day notice, not a 45-day notice.
Well, I don't see the lack of work. We have one of the biggest non-English speaking students within the whole Northern California. I mean, you can't tell me can't find her work in the office.
So we have 2 family advocate bilinguals currently. One is 6 hours, and one we piloted at 8 hours. For this language, she's supporting Spanish.
Right.
There isn't work for Spanish. Now, the elementary ed department will be observing for this next upcoming school year other languages where there may be a need. So there may be for future work to support the family advocate program.
Well, what I've seen in limited English-speaking and non-English-speaking population, it's increasing. The reports I've seen, Department of Education, they're increasing, so I don't see the lack of work.
So we have BTAs, so we have teaching associate bilinguals, where we have about 30-plus bilingual teaching associates that also support our schools. These 2 positions work out of the Healthy Start office. Again, one being 6, one being 8, but both positions having enough work for 6 hours each. So the audit was done this year, and the proposed reduction is for this coming year, September 30th. So yes, we do have support for all languages. In addition to, we have family advocates working out of the Healthy Start office. This employee also has requested a reduction in hours, totally separate, but in line with her second job.
That's not my concern, her personal thing. Well, it is in a way, but yet we need more bilingual staff. That's the bottom line in our district. We don't communicate with our community. We don't engage within our community, so we need somebody in the headquarters to get us some guidelines to us as board members to do some outreach. You know, we have board meetings and we don't have non-English speaking people out here.
So one of the opportunities that we'll continue to discuss with CSEA is the possibility of getting onto the BTA list for the additional hours. But that's an option as we negotiate the effects of layoff if approved by the board.
Yeah, it would have been also nice if we would have seen an actual, what do you call it, a job description, and an organization chart to see what actual she fits in the organization at the district office. You know, that's something that we're missing. So To me, we don't have, again, not enough data or information to make a good decision. Thank you.
Dr.
Carmen.
Martinez-Leary, question? Ms. Albiani?
We are providing, what I'm hearing is we're providing a 60-day warning, and the union, we have an agreement with them for a 45-day warning or notice. We're over that. And if we postpone doing this to a meeting, we would fall under it, correct?
Well, with classified layoffs, we can do it throughout the year, so long as we
Right.
provide a 60-day notice.
Delaying the decision would
Right.
Delay when we would like
Delaying
to
the
take
decision by the
action.
board would delay when the action could take place.
Yes, but the action is postponed. Okay, but we have your commitment to continue to work with her?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Madison?
No, well, the question I had, it sounded like she has some other personal things that's going on as well. Is that correct? The 2 hours you mentioned, she had something,
Well,
another,
yeah,
separate.
from this actual formal reduction,
I see.
she has a separate request, yes.
Okay. That's it. I don't have any.
Is it dealing with family medical sickness?
Well, that has nothing to do, no, it has nothing to do with the motion to reduce the position. Her personal matters are no, excuse me, you're out of order. With respect to the request that's being made, you know, I certainly can understand that 2 hours of someone's job on a $460 million budget is really not a whole heck of a lot. The other side of the coin, however, is we have a responsibility to make prudent decisions. And certainly, if with this position residing, you said in Healthy Start, those people I know are very cognizant of what their needs are, and not a day goes by that they are not doing what they need to do to address their needs. Coupled with the fact that director was also the principal of that school and worked very closely with Healthy Start, I have no questions at this point in time that they are making a prudent decision. So I would ask for a motion to adopt resolution number 7.
I'll move that.
Okay, approved by Mr. Madison, second by Ms. Albiani. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, next, resolution to eliminate and to reduce an AFSCME classified position. Mr. Riley.
Thank you. This position is a student store technician at Elk Grove High School. It is resolution number 6 for your consideration, 2016-17, authorizing the governing board to eliminate or reduce this classified position.
Okay, any questions from the board? All right, hearing none, I would like to have a motion to adopt resolution number 6. Okay, moved by Ms. Albiani, second by Mr. Madison. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Opposed? All right, unanimously passed.
No, because the fact again. I oppose because we do not have data, we don't have more information to make a good decision. Thank you.
Yeah, you know what? It's not necessarily appropriate for me to make comments, but I'm going to. You have been told for the last 4 years that if you have questions or have requests of information, it is incumbent upon you to address the people who can provide that information prior to a scheduled board meeting. Voting no is indeed not proper responsibility for your position. I just gave it.
If I can say just one comment too, when it comes to layoff or adhering to certain timelines, it's something that our staff, we're not taking lightly. We have to make certain that we have worked for those folks, make certain that that we are doing the right thing. And this school district in my time has done that. And again, I support Mr. Fortino when he mentioned if you have doubts about a reduction, we all should go to Mr. Riley and ask some more clarity behind it. Thank you.
As a I'd like to say something.
Thank you. No, the item is finished. The resolution has been voted on.
I'd like to speak on behalf
Board
of,
member reports, any
What?
board member reports?
I can't
No,
speak?
you're overruled. No.
why is that?
You're overruled.
Why
Wait
is
till
that?
the end of the meeting in the open section. Are there any board member reports from committee work that's been done? None? Mr. Superintendent? None. Okay. Okay, I'd like to move the consent agenda, items 1 through 19. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
I'd like to pull item number 8.
Items 1 through 19, we have a motion to approve items 1 through 19 with the exception of number 8. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. All right, we have item number 8 that's been requested to be pulled. What are your concerns, Mr. Perez?
Yes, I noticed that you had a cash donation here, Sacramento County of Education, Valley High School, Cashville College. Sacramento County Office of Education gave us some money for that particular program. And is it a person from the actual county or what?
Thank you, Ms. Hayes.
So I don't have the actual deposit. We can go back and look to see who it came from, and we can provide you with those details if you'd like.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to have a motion to approve item number 8.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Second? I will second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, it passes. Other items from the floor.
Me.
Mr. Perez.
Yes, there are many times the public who is watching through our video need to know, or I need to express my concerns that are on the agenda. And I think it's appropriate that I ask questions at that time during our meetings. There's no, I don't think there are any rules, Robert Rules of Order that state I cannot ask questions. And if I want to take the liberty to ask questions at this board meetings, I have the right to. There has been times that I have called off to the office to inquire about these questions and issues. And a lot of times the individuals are in meetings or not in the office. They're within the school district working at other schools. And so therefore, that's why I have taken the privilege to ask questions at board meetings. And I think it's very important that the public knows that I'm very concerned about these issues. And I raise these issues and question these issues to maybe get some response from my fellow board members. But apparently, I do not get responses. Thank you.
Any other items? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.